Hi, everybody. I'm Ray and I'm an alcoholic. Thank you all for being here. Uh, what I'd like to do is I want to really thank Sean and Kim. Thank you so much for your support for this workshop. And I also would like to thank Ira, Melissa, Jimmy, Brian, and Angela for all their help. I wouldn't be able to do this without you guys. My sobriety date is December 1st of 1977. And I didn't come to Alcoholics Anonymous for recovery. I came here because I couldn't blow my brains out. When I was 20 years old, I went home one day and found my father hanging in the garage. He had hung himself. And within the next 2 years, I did 2 tours in Vietnam. And I came home very angry and very resentful. And then I went into the motion picture business. I drank with Steve McQueen, Laurence Olivier, Lucille Ball, and I could go on and on. But I was getting sicker. The alcoholism was progressing, and I was getting in a lot of trouble. And it just got to a place where the self-loathing got me here every bit as much as drinking. I just couldn't hate me one more day. I either had to kill myself or do something. And I had done a show at Fox Studios, and the guy said he had 15 years of sobriety and went to AA. And believe it or not, in 1977, I didn't know what the 2A stood for because you didn't hear about it. You didn't talk about it. You didn't see any advertisements of it. And anyways, this guy took me to my first meeting, and I started meeting people like I'd never met before in my life. It was amazing. And I want you to know I'm no expert on this book. I'm just the guy that was lucky. I don't have an original idea in my head. I'm not that smart. Everything you're going to hear was passed to me from the originals, the people that really knew what this stuff was about. So I went to, me and my late wife, Linda, we went to, from 1988 till 2004, every year in September, we went to a 4-day big book seminar with Joe and Charlie. I heard Mark Houston, I heard Joe Hawk, I heard Chuck Chamberlain. I mean, Sandy Beach, I can't tell you all the help I've had and all the book studies I've been through. So this isn't, please, it's not about me. But one of the reasons I like doing these is the message in the fellowship is getting further from the message in the book every day. I'll give you an example. Heard in a meeting, this is a selfish program. Page 20, paragraph 1. Our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may help meet their needs. Does that sound like a selfish program? I wonder what book that guy is reading. You know, and then in page 97, paragraph 2, helping others is the foundation stone of my recovery. That doesn't sound very selfish either, does it? Then it says, meeting makers make it. Page 59, paragraph 3. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. Meeting makers make it. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. It's not as a result of the number of meetings I went through. Wow. So I'm just trying to show you, I could go on and on with this stuff, but what we're hearing in the meeting isn't what you're reading in the book. I have an article that talks about in the 70s and 80s, they started having participation discussion meetings. They didn't have those before. They used to be literature driven, a speaker or a topic, something to do with recovery. And when we started the discussion speaker meetings, AA turned to group therapy. And it was no longer the message that we hear in the book. That's the message that saved my life. And so that's why I do these things, because I just met this young lady right over here, and I want her to know there's a solution here, and it's real, and it's not mumbo jumbo. It'll make sense to you after you go through this work. You know, I want to take you, guys, I'm going to take you to the title. Excuse me. Before I begin this, I got to do this, and I forgot this. I would like, this is what I had to do before I went to join Charlie every time. You guys, in the paper, you have a thing called the set-aside prayer. If you'd like, I'm going to read it. You can follow me if you'd like. Dear God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, this book, my disease, these steps, and especially about you, dear God, so that I might have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please help me see the truth. I hope you don't get tired of it, but I'm going to read that every time before we start into the book. So, and I'm just sure, so this is the title page of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? It's in your book. It doesn't have this circle and triangle in it anymore. From 1957 till 1993, this was the AA logo that was in all the books. And the reason I want to show it to you is because it meant a great deal to me when I was new, when my sponsor took me through this book. So it says the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. There's your first promise and a lot of hope right there on the title page. We haven't even gotten into the main part of the book. But what they showed me was that circle and triangle. So these are the three legacies of AA: unity, service, recovery. You mean there's no legacy called sobriety? Isn't in there, is it? I'm going to read you from page 19 in the big book. We feel elimination of our drinking is but a beginning. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies before us in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. So sobriety is a necessary ingredient, but it isn't the goal. The goal is recovery. I came here to be recovered. Does that make sense to everybody? And there's also know that symbol, that circle and that triangle, that's a spiritual symbol. A circle as a spiritual symbol is a sign of wholeness. I was always trying to make myself feel whole with alcohol, women, food, whatever. You know, character, I wasn't interested in building that. That didn't interest me in the least. But, and also it tells me that I have a threefold disease. It's a disease of mind, body, and spirit. So in the unity is the traditions. There's 12 of them. The service is the concepts. There's 12 of them. And recovery is the steps. There's 12 of those. And each one has a spiritual principle. I got 36 spiritual principles to make my life better. You know, years ago, a man named Aldous Huxley, a writer from the UK, philosopher, told Bill Wilson, God is the experience of principles applied. If I apply the principles, God's going to show up in my life. Now, I already told you about Vietnam and my dad's suicide. I didn't want God in my life when I got here. So, but I'll touch on that as we go through the book. I didn't know it was my own ignorance. You know, I said to my sponsor one thing, he must have known I was agnostic. He said, you weren't agnostic, Ray, you were an ignoramus. And so now let's go to the preface of this book. And the preface says in the second paragraph, because it's Roman numeral 11, XI, because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left largely untouched in the course of revisions made for the second, third, and fourth editions. So it tells me right there that this is a textbook. And you and I know that a textbook is designed to transfer information. But our textbook is way better than that, because our textbook is to provide us a spiritual awakening or spiritual experience. And there's no other textbook I know about that does this. And the other part of this that's, well, I'll hit on it in a second. So now I know that this is the textbook, and I know that the first part of this volume, he says, is where the recovery program is, meaning the first 164 pages. So let's flip over to the forward to the first edition on Roman numeral XIII. And it says, this is the forward as it appeared in the first printing of the first edition in 1939. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body to show other alcoholics, not to tell other alcoholics, to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. You mean the main purpose of this book isn't for me to be sober? That's not what it says, huh? For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the alcoholic. Many do not comprehend that the alcoholic is a very sick person. You're going to say that about 10 more times as we go through this book. And besides, we are sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. If my problem was alcohol, he probably wouldn't keep telling me how sick I am, huh? Now, the other thing I want you to show other alcoholics, we're not supposed to, learning this book isn't going to do me any good. I got to follow the book. This is a recipe. If you follow the recipe in here, it'll do for you what it did for me. Does that make sense? And the reason I'm saying that is, I want you to hear, I'm going to page 39 in the book. I'm in the first full paragraph, the second sentence. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. So I'm not reading this book for knowledge. I'm reading it because I'm going to have to do what they did if I want the results they got. And the results they got, they already told you in the beginning, was recovery. They're recovered. Now, also in that forward of the first edition, he says precisely. Listen to this. This is from a 1936 Webster's Dictionary. Precisely, exactly or sharply defined or stated, minutely exact, not varying in the slightest degree from truth. Whoa, that's pretty heavy. Now let's go to page 20. The other thing I want you to know, and especially you people that are newer to this book, this isn't a whole bunch of different chapters and a whole bunch of, this is one book, one story. It's about us. And I hope I show you that by skipping around a little bit like I'm going to do now. So page 20, first full paragraph. You may already have asked yourself why it is that all of us became so very ill, there it is again, from drinking. Doubtless you're curious to discover how and why, in the face of expert opinion to the contrary, we have recovered from a hopeless condition of mind and body. If you are an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking, what do I have to do? Next sentence. It is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. We shall tell you what we have done. So do you see how we're supposed to do what they did? Johnny Harris says all the time, it's monkey see, monkey do. That's what we're doing here. It's not about learning anything. It's about doing what these people did so that we can have recovery. Now, let's go to page 45. Page 45. First full paragraph. Lack of power. That was Ray's dilemma. Ray had to find a power by which he could live, and it had to be a power greater than Ray, obviously. But where and how was Ray to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable Ray to solve his problem. Wow. That's heavy duty, isn't it? Precisely, specifically. Now we got the main thing of this book. It's amazing, isn't it? Now, just to help you see what we're talking about, let's go to page 29. And he says, in the first paragraph, further on, clear-cut directions are given showing how we recover. And we got precisely, specifically, the main object. Further on, clear-cut directions. Holy cow. Let's go to page 85 a second. I don't want you thinking you're going to work for nothing. So on page 85, if you look at the second full paragraph, the second sentence, if I have carefully followed directions, I have begun to sense the flow of his spirit into me. Wow, I just had my spiritual awakening. I had a spiritual experience. I'm now feeling God. Not too shabby, is it? You're going to get a reward for this work, is what I'm trying to show you. Now, where did all this talk about directions all of a sudden come from? Okay, this is an original manuscript. This is the way Bill wrote this book before the fellowship changed anything. Chapter 5, how it works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our directions. That's the way it originally read. But every time he finished a chapter, he made an agreement to send it to Akron and to New York, and the fellowship could have a say. The minute you give an alcoholic something to say, he's going to find an easier, softer way. Second paragraph on page 58. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you have decided you want what we have and you are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are ready to follow directions. That's the way he wrote it. There's a lot of other changes in this too. We'll come to some later, but I just want you to know we've changed a lot of stuff that used to work real good. And I want everything those guys got because I'm a sick alcoholic. I want more. So, anyways, now let's go to the forward to the second edition on page XVI. First paragraph. Prior to his journey to Akron, the broker, meaning Bill, had worked hard with many alcoholics on the theory that only an alcoholic could help an alcoholic, but he had succeeded only in keeping sober himself. So I'm sure many of you know the story of Bill. He tried to help a lot of people in Towns Hospital, and he couldn't get anybody sober. He kept telling them about his white light experience that he'd had in his room and how he got a visit from God, and we don't even know if that's true. He was on the belladonna treatment, and that's a hallucinatory thing. We don't know if he got a visit from God or, we don't know. But he thought he did, and he kept telling these alcoholics about him. And finally, he's getting ready to go to Akron for this trip. And he goes to Dr. Silkworth and he tells him, man, I'm trying to help these people, but nobody's. And Silkworth tells him, Bill, you're going about it all wrong. A non-alcoholic told the alcoholic, you're going about it all wrong. He said, you're trying to shove God down these guys' throats and they're puking it up. He said, tell him what I told you about the medical estimate of alcoholism, the grave nature of it, how I took. Dr. Silkworth didn't know that it was a spiritual thing that was going to fix the alcoholic. He didn't know that. He knew the medical things, and he told Bill, you're going to die. So now let's go down to the next paragraph on XVI. This physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. Now they're talking about Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob was going to the Oxford group for 2 years before he met Bill. Where did Bill get his solution from? Ebby Thatcher. Where did Ebby get it from? The Oxford group. Dr. Bob's already been in the Oxford group 2 years, but he can't get well because he doesn't know the grave nature of alcoholism. You have to know the problem and the solution. One or the other is not going to do you any good. You have to know both in order to recover. Because Bill knew the problem, but he didn't know the solution until Ebby came and visited him and told him what he found out in the Oxford group, which he had found out from Roland Hazard, who found it out from Carl Jung. Are we together right now? Okay. So let's go to the next page, XVII, and the forward to the second edition, and let's go down to the third paragraph. It was now time, the struggling groups thought, to place their message and unique experience before the world. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this book. The membership, which had then reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, now remember this, Bob and Bill met. Bob gets sober June 10th of 35. This is the spring of 39, what we called between that time. Here it tells you, the fledgling society, which had been nameless, we had no name, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous from the title of its own book. This is the first Alcoholics Anonymous the world ever knew. The fellowship stole the name from the book. And I already proved to you from those things you hear in meetings, the fellowship is not Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a bunch of defiant, stubborn, says the outstanding characteristic of the alcoholic is defiance and rebellion. So now you can see how the messages have drifted apart. And if you want to get recovery, I suggest you go into this book. Okay, still in the forward of the second edition, let's go over to page XX or Roman numeral 20. Let's see, it's in the top of the third paragraph, or third sentence, of alcoholics who came to AA and really tried, 50% got sober at once. %50 got sober at once and remained that way. 25% sobered up after some relapses. Do you think that's our recovery rate today? It's that thing I told you about. Here it is. Then in the 60s, we started discussion participation meetings that failed to stick to the singleness of purpose. So by 1980, we had dropped to 33%, the result of which we started ignoring the practice of focusing on our solution, and we drifted into group therapy. And now it's down lower than this that we read back then. So you can see what's happened. And when I came here, when I tell you they were very serious about it. And my sponsor said, Ray, do you know what commitment is? I said, He had to say no. I said, what's commitment? He said, well, Ray, if you had bacon and eggs this morning, he said, the chicken was involved, but the pig was committed, and I want you committed. I said, yes, sir. That's the way we did it. So let's go to the doctor's opinion. And let's go to page Roman numeral 26, XXVI. First full paragraph. Now remember, Dr. Silkworth treated over 50,000 alcoholics in his life. This guy knew his business. He worked with more alcoholics than any other physician. The physician, they're talking about Silkworth, who at our request gave us this letter, has been kind enough to enlarge upon his views in another statement which follows. In this statement, he confirms what we who have suffered alcoholic torture must believe, that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as his mind. I meant to tell you guys before, these are spiritual exercises. You can't start a spiritual exercise with an answer. It has to start with a question. So how I turn these statements into question, I say, Ray, have you suffered alcoholic torture? Yeah, I have. But you can take these statements and you can turn them into questions, because what we're trying to do is we're taking the view of this book, consideration. I'm considering, is this me? Does this apply to me? Did I drink like these people? Did I do what they did? Yes, I did. Okay. So he says that the body of the alcoholic is quite as abnormal as mind. It did not satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, or were outright mental defectives. I like that. These things were true to some extent, in fact, to a considerable extent with some of us, but we are sure that our bodies were sickened as well. In our belief, any picture of the alcoholic which leaves out this physical factor is incomplete. The doctor's theory that we have an allergy to alcohol interests us. As laymen, our opinion as to its soundness may of course mean little, but as ex-problem drinkers, I can say that his explanation makes good sense. It explains many things for which I cannot otherwise account. My sponsor said to me, hey, Ray, did you ever drink more than you intended to? I said, are you joking? I drank more than I intended to every time I ever drank. Didn't you guys do that? Well, why'd you do that? Because we had an allergy to alcohol, or maybe it was even an addiction. Now turn over to page Roman numeral 28, XXVIII. We believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy, that the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. A normal person never suffers from the phenomenon of craving. Never. This is what sets us apart and makes us distinct from them. Here's an article I'm going to read. This is called The Phenomenon of Craving. You have it in your packet. Now, what makes this so profound is, you got to remember, when this book came out, they couldn't measure metabolism. This is how smart Silkworth was, but he knew it had to be an allergy. So later they could measure metabolism, and I'm going to read to you what it says. The body of the alcoholic is physically different. The liver and pancreas of the alcoholic process alcohol at 1/3 to 1/10 the rate of a normal pancreas and liver. Now, as alcohol enters the body, it breaks down into various components, one of which is acetate. We know now that acetate triggers a craving for more acetate. In a normal drinker, the acetate moves through the system quickly and exits, but that doesn't happen with an alcoholic. In alcoholics, the acetate of the first drink is barely processed, so by staying in their body, it triggers a craving for more acetate. The alcoholic then takes a second drink, and now adding to most of the acetate of the first drink, and that makes them want to drink twice as much as a normal drinker. Each time you and I ordered a drink, we were a different person. Willpower had nothing to do with it. Does that make any sense? This is a medical thing. This is real. I never could understand why I went in for 2 drinks and stayed till the bar closed. I did it all the time. So I'm trying to say to you, is this stuff that we're reading and we're doing makes total sense if you'll think about what I'm talking about. Then he says, I'm back to page 28, Roman numeral XXVIII. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all. And once having formed the habit and found they cannot break it, once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human, their problems pile up on them and become astonishingly difficult to solve. That happened to me. Then he says, frothy emotional appeal seldom suffices. You know what frothy emotional appeal is? Why do you drink like that? Can't you use your willpower to, why can't you drink like I drink? What's the matter with you? People were saying that to me all the time. The message which can interest and hold these alcoholic people must have depth and weight. In nearly all cases, their ideals must be grounded in a power greater than themselves if they are to recreate their lives. That spiritual awakening recreates my life. Let's go down to the bottom paragraph. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. You heard about the strange mental twist that precedes the first drink? Well, if you can't differentiate the true from the false, in a few paragraphs we'll read about Jim. He thought it would be okay to mix a little whiskey with his milk. It'd be okay. He was stone sober when he made that decision. So the problem happens when we're sober. The problem doesn't happen when I'm drinking. Does that make sense to everybody? They are restless, irritable, and discontented. I was restless, irritable, and discontent at 10 years old, and I wasn't drinking or using. I promise you. I didn't fit in my own skin. And then it says, unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort, which comes at once by taking a few drinks. We didn't drink because of the high. We didn't drink to get drunk. I drank because when I drank, I felt comfortable in my skin. I didn't feel the dis-ease of being me. If that makes any sense to any of you. And that sense of ease and comfort comes at once by taking a few drinks which I see other people taking with impunity after they have succumbed to the desire again, as so many do, and the phenomenon of craving develops. They pass through well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over. Unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there's very little hope of his recovery. When I read that, I thought I knew I wasn't going to be able to make this program. An entire psychic change sounded to me like something that wasn't going to happen to me. And there was a glass of water sitting between me and my sponsor. He said, "Ray, do you know what an entire psychic change is?" I said, "No, what is it?" He said, "You see that glass is half empty. I see it as half full." Entire psychic change. Make sense? I was a little bit negative. And remember, when we're reading this, let's go. I'll say it when we get over here to this next. Let's go over to Roman numeral 30, XXX. The second full paragraph. The classification of alcoholics seems most difficult and in much detail is outside the scope of this book. So he's trying to tell us the different types. There are, of course, the psychopaths who are emotionally unstable. We're all familiar with this type. They are always going on the wagon for keeps. They are over remorseful and make many resolutions, but never a decision. Do you know the difference between a resolution and decision? If a decision is not followed by an action, don't make the decision. I couldn't make decisions because then I was going to have to do something. Now there is a type of man who is unwilling to admit that he cannot take a drink. He plans various ways of drinking. He changes his brand or his environment. There is the type who believes that after being entirely free from alcohol for a period of time, he can take a drink without danger. I think I got something that says something about that. You guys ever watch Miami Vice? I'm not breaking anybody's anonymity. These articles were in the paper. Don Johnson had been sober for 10 years and made an agreement to do a radio show with a guy. And the guy told him, "Now listen, don't use bad language on this show and don't do this, that, and the other." And Don Johnson was drunk doing the interview and he was cussing at the guy and doing this. And they just bleeped him off and turned off his mic. And he said to the guy, he said, "Listen, I make more money than you, I'm better looking than you, and I can do whatever I want." And they turned his mic off, and Don Johnson's publicist was very embarrassed by this. So he told the guy, he said, "Listen, he's been sober for 10 years, and he figured he could have a glass of wine now. He can't." That's what his publicist said. And it cost Johnson because he didn't work for a while after that. This is another article about a 37-year-old guy. This is some years ago. He was making 1994, he was making $3 million a year, had other businesses. He was a professional baseball player. And he put himself into a rehab, but he used a little cocaine and a little heroin and a little alcohol and OD. 37 years old. And I'm just saying this, you can't scare an alcoholic, but I'm trying to tell you guys, this is a serious disease and this stuff happens. And I know it happens because I've seen it happen since I've been here. And so it's nothing to mess around with. And it might, you might find out that it's something that you can't really, it's beyond you is what I'm trying to say. It's, we always think we can, I couldn't direct a one-car funeral procession. My life's unmanageable. So it's important for us to really think about who we are, what we're doing, and what's happening. I'm going to give you guys a homework assignment before next week. I want you to read Bill's story in pages 1 through 8. I want you to ask yourself, did I think, drink, or feel like Bill did? And then I want you to read pages 9 through 16, where it talks about Bill's recovery, and ask yourself, is there anything in these pages I'm not willing to do that Bill did? I want to read you a little something on page 8 from Bill's story, because only an alcoholic will understand these words. On page 8, first paragraph, no words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksands stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. Did anybody experience that? Good. You got a shot. So everything we're looking at here is right from our textbook. You can see that. And it's real. This is real. This disease. I guess I'll start into it. We won't be able to finish it, but I'll start. Let's go to chapter 2. There is a solution. On page 17. So it says, chapter 2, there is a solution. We of Alcoholics Anonymous know thousands of men and women who were once just as hopeless as Bill. Turn that statement into a question. Was Ray as hopeless as Bill? What does he mean by hopeless? People will tell you it's desperation, but it's not. I was going to divorce court. I was going to jail. I was doing all the stuff that we do. I was desperate, but I wasn't hopeless until I realized I was beyond human aid. And it says it right in the book. There was no human power that was going to help me. Let's go down. So now he's going to talk to us about the fellowship. And there's a big paragraph there, but let's go down to the last 2 sentences in that first paragraph. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. Wait a minute. Let's turn to page 75. Danielle, what's the last sentence say on page 75? Wow, it takes 2 elements to make cement. It takes mortar and sand. But on page 17, he says the feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which binds us. But that in itself would not have held us together as we are now joined. What's he telling you? The fellowship is, you're not going to get recovery from the fellowship. I just told you I'm beyond human aid. That's why I'm hopeless. What's the fellowship made up of? Humans, isn't it? But I'm beyond human aid. So the fellowship isn't, because that's just the problem. Remember I told you we need the problem and the solution? I need 2 elements to make that cement, because that cement is going to be my foundation. I'm building a spiritual structure, which I'm going to try to pass to freedom. Last paragraph on page 17. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. A common solution means if it worked for me, it'll work for you. We have the common problem. Now we got a common solution. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and upon which we can join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. So, and remember, the name of this chapter is There Is a Solution. And I want you to know there is. Let's flip over to page 18. An illness of this sort, and we have come to believe that an illness involves those about us in a way that no other human sickness can. If a person has cancer, all are sorry for him and no one is angry or hurt, but not so with the alcoholic illness, for with it there goes annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. It engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. It brings misunderstanding, fierce resentment, financial insecurity, disgusted friends and employers, warped lives of blameless children, sad wives and parents. Anyone can increase the list. He's telling us this is a family disease. And if you had alcoholism in your home, you were affected by it. It's just plain and simple. You know, I did this years ago. I took a guy, he was in Carolina, I was in LA, and I was taking him through this book. He had 18 years of sobriety. And he was a good guy, a good friend of mine. And he had a Native American mother, alcoholic addict, who earned a living on the streets. And he didn't know who his father was. But we were going through this part of the book. He had 18 years, but he'd never been through the book. But finally, he made the decision he wanted to go through the book. So I was taking him through the book. And when I got to this part, warped lives of blameless, well, I didn't read it that way. I said, warped lives of blameless Randys. His name was Randy. This guy's about 6'5", about 230, and I started to bawl like a baby when I said that on the phone, because he never realized that he didn't have a chance. You know, his mother was an alcoholic addict, never knew who his dad was. And that was his life. And so, you know, that's the other part of this book that I didn't say to you guys, but I've studied everything about how this book was written, about how AA came to be. And let me tell you, if you think Bill Wilson wrote this book at 3.5 years sober, I know who wrote this book. That God that I rejected when I got here. There's no way. I've worked with as many alcoholics as anybody that has my amount of time. And I've never known a guy in 3 years that could have wrote this book with 3 years of sobriety. But I just want you to know for me, this is a special, special book. Let's go down on page 18 to the squiggly writing. I don't know if you guys ever heard the story, but they didn't have much money when they made this book. They didn't know if they were going to ever get the book done or not because of money problems. And back in this day, with the print and the type, every time they wanted to put something in italics, they had to stop the press, change the fonts, print, so it cost more. So when you see something in italics, pay attention. It's important. They thought it was important enough that they were willing to spend more for these parts of the book. Seamus asked his sponsor, why is this in italics? And the sponsor said, because they couldn't put it in neon. So it says in the italics, but the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. Until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. And the only value today that my story has to me is to tell it to somebody new, enough of it that they can identify. That's what he's talking about here. Until you can identify with me, you aren't going to do anything. I didn't do anything till I started identifying with those guys. You know, I also didn't tell you this, but the guys that helped me when I was new, one of them sobered up May 8th of 1948, and the other one sobered up April of 1941 off the Jack Alexander article. And these guys were the real deal. And you did it by this book. And they didn't, you know, they were wonderful people. Don't misunderstand me. The most special people I ever met in my life. One of them was a man named Al Marino. He's the guy that sobered up in 1941. Jimmy's got my keys, so I can't show you. I got a medallion on those keys because Al died in 1984 playing golf with me at Griffith Park Golf Course. And I followed the ambulance over to St. Joe's Hospital, and they gave me a little medallion to get in the parking lot. And Al died, and I kept that medallion, put a hole in it, put it on my keychain, because I don't ever want to forget those people that saved my life and took time with me and explained all this stuff to me. Because like I told you, I don't have original idea in my head. I'm not that smart. But thank God for those guys. Now let's read right below that what we just read about the squiggly writing. Let's go on after that. This describes a great sponsor. That the man who is making the approach has had the same difficulty, that he obviously knows what he is talking about, that his whole deportment shouts at the new prospect that he is a man with a real answer, that he has no attitude of holier than thou, nothing whatever except a sincere desire to be helpful, that there are no fees to pay, no axes to grind, no people to please, no lectures to be endured. These are conditions we have found most effective. After such an approach, many take up their beds and walk again. That's a hell of a sponsor right there. They just described. You know, I got to back up a minute for you guys. I'm getting too old to do this. I want to go back to the doctor's opinion a second, and I want to go to page Roman numeral 30. And what I'm trying, in the doctor's opinion, when he told us about the different types and all that, alcoholism is an internal disease. It's not external. I'm not alcoholic because of my skin color, because of who my dad was, because of who my mom was, because of who my wife was. It's internal. Does that make sense? I read a book called yes, that one. Thank you, Melissa. The Spirituality of Imperfection. And there's two guys from the Holocaust together. And one of them says to the other one, he said, have you forgiven the Jews? And he said, no, I haven't. I hate them. He said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. They still have you in prison. You know, this is an internal thing. And there's a book, I'm sure many of you know, it's about step 6 and 7. It's called Drop the Rock. Drop the Rock is me getting rid of my story. My story isn't me anymore. We'll see it in the book. We'll cover it in a few weeks. I've been reborn. You know, so you don't have to let your past doesn't have to have anything to do with right now. Nothing. Does it make sense about alcoholism being an internal disease? when I see the truth in the resentment, I don't have it anymore. We only got a couple minutes. Does anybody have any question about anything we've done this session? Every Friday at same time. You gotta talk louder. I'm lower. Yes, you're gonna read Bill's story, in pages 1 through 8. You're gonna say, "Did I think, drink, or feel like Bill did?" In pages 9 through 16, you're gonna ask, "Is there anything Bill did to recover that I'm not willing to do?" I'm not going to go any further because we're going to get into some heavy duty stuff real quick here, and I don't want to shortchange anything. But I really want to thank you all for coming. I hope you'll find this beneficial to your recovery.
Yes, thank you very much.
Hey, good job.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question about the psychic change? Could you explain on that a little bit more? Does that happen?
Good job, Ray.
To me, I believe it happens when I surrender.
I'm going to, next week, we're going to be talking about that. And it's,
Again, next week, the Wilson House will be on at 5:15. The meeting will be at 5:30. Either join us in the room or on Zoom.
Thanks, Ray.
Showing up and also contributing for the cost of this.
Thank you, Ray.
Much, Ray.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you. Happy
Thank you,
4th.
Ray. Thank you.
Very
Love
much.
you.
Ray.
Thanks, Ray.
you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Ray.
everyone. Thanks, Melissa and Jimmy.
Rick.
Thanks, Ray.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Ray.
Love you, Ray.
Hi, Bruce, Eileen.
Thank you, Ray, and everyone.